Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're diving deep, really deep, into Stephen Bartlett's The Diary of a CEO.
We're going to unearth those golden nuggets of wisdom, the practical advice, the surprising stories that you can actually use.
Whether you're running a business, leading a team, or just trying to level up your own life.
Because Bartlett's not just about business. He's about building a life of success on your own terms.
So he lays out this framework he calls the 4 pillars of greatness.
It sounds a bit, I don't know, corporate-y at first.
It does, a little bit, but stick with us. These pillars are self, story, philosophy, and team.
And they're not just buzzwords, trust me. Think of it this way. Your personal growth, how you communicate your vision, the values that drive you, and the people you surround yourself with. Those are the cornerstones of achieving anything worthwhile.
It's interesting how he breaks down each pillar using specific laws and real-life examples. He really stresses self-awareness and self-mastery. You got to get a handle on yourself before you can handle anything else right.
It's true, you can't pour from an empty cup, as they say. And that's where storytelling comes in. Crafting a narrative that connects with people, inspires them to buy into your vision.
Right, and that's where your philosophy comes in, having a clear sense of your values, your beliefs, because those will shape every decision you make. It's like a compass for your life and work.
Guiding your actions. And of course, no one achieves greatness alone. That's where the team pillar comes in, building a group of people who complement your strength.
Challenge your weaknesses and share that commitment to the mission. And Bartlett doesn't stop at just the framework. He talks about filling your 5 buckets, but in a specific order: knowledge, skills, network, resources, and then reputation.
And it's that order that really makes you think, why prioritize knowledge and skills above, let's say, a killer network or a ton of resources?
He tells this story about a young guy named Richard, offered a CEO position at only 21.
Can you imagine? 21 years old, a CEO.
That's incredibly young to be running a company. What did Bartlett advise him to do?
He told him, point blank, not to take it.
Seriously, why would he do that? It seems like a dream come true.
Here's the thing. Richard had the network, right? He'd been handed this incredible opportunity. And the resources, a big salary, equity in the company, it was all there. What he didn't have were those first 2 buckets. He lacked the knowledge and skills to truly excel. Without a strong foundation, Bartlett knew, Richard was setting himself up for failure.
It's like being given the keys to a Ferrari when you've never even driven a stick shift.
Yeah, you might look the part, but you're bound to crash and burn.
And Bartlett knows this from experience. Early in his career, he focused on building his own knowledge, honing his skills. He realized those were the assets that no one could take away, even if he lost his network, his money, his reputation.
Exactly. Those are the foundations you build a legacy on.
So how do we apply this idea of prioritizing knowledge and skills to our own lives?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Whether it's starting a business, learning a new language, or just being better at our jobs, where do we even begin?
So knowledge and skills, they're like the base of the pyramid, right? But how do you actually go about mastering them? I mean, there's so much information out there. It's easy to feel overwhelmed.
You're telling me. And that's where one of Bartlett's more, shall we say, counterintuitive laws comes into play. He calls it Law 2. To master it, you must create an obligation to teach it.
Wait, so to really learn something, you should try to teach it. That sounds a little backwards.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
He actually uses this story about himself struggling with stage fright to illustrate the point.
Really?
Yeah, imagine being terrified of public speaking, but then deciding, you know what, I'm going to teach others about business and marketing.
That takes guts. Why would he put himself through that?
Because, and this is key, he knew that by having to teach it, he'd be forced to really learn it, to practice, to get over that fear.
Because the pressure was on. If he didn't know the stuff well enough to teach it, he'd be letting people down.
Exactly. He had skin in the game. And Bartlett really took this to heart. Sharing his ideas online, writing those daily tweets, making videos, putting himself out there even when it was uncomfortable.
It's like that saying, if you want to learn something, read about it. To understand it, write about it. To master it, teach it.
Right. And it's not just about becoming some guru. When you teach, you have to organize the information, make it clear for others. That process alone solidifies your own understanding.
It's like you're not just passively consuming information anymore, you're actively engaging with it.
Yes. And there's this psychological thing called loss aversion, basically. We're more motivated by avoiding losses than by gaining something. So when you're teaching, you've got something on the line, your reputation, people's trust, you're more likely to step up your game.
That's fascinating. Okay, so we've got this foundation, right? We're building our knowledge, honing those skills. But what about communicating those ideas to others, getting people on board with our vision? That's where things get really, I don't know, tricky.
Absolutely. And this is where Bartlett throws out another curveball. With his Law 3, you must never disagree.
Wait, what? Never disagree. That sounds like a recipe for, like, never standing up for what you believe in.
Hold on, hold on. It's not about being a pushover. It's about understanding how persuasion actually works, the psychology behind it.
Okay, so explain that. What's the psychology of never disagreeing?
Well, Bartlett points out that our brains, they cling to our existing beliefs even when faced with evidence that contradicts them.
You can't reason someone out of a position they didn't reason themselves into, right?
Exactly. And there's actually neuroscience to back this up. Neuroscientist Tali Sherrod, she found that presenting people with opposing facts can actually backfire,
Yeah.
make them even more entrenched in their original views.
Because it's threatening.
It creates this cognitive dissonance, that uncomfortable feeling when our beliefs are challenged. Our brains would rather double down on what we already think than go through the mental gymnastics of changing our minds.
So if we can't change people's minds by hitting them with facts and figures, what do we do? How do we have productive conversations?
Bartlett's answer? Ask questions, don't make statements. He uses Ronald Reagan as an example, specifically that famous question during the 1980 debate, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago?
Such a simple question, but brilliant.
Right. Instead of bombarding voters with statistics, Reagan made them reflect on their own experiences.
You put the ball in their court.
Yes. And that, according to Bartlett, is the key to persuasion. It's about engaging people in a dialogue, not dictating what they should think.
It's making them part of the process.
Yes. Make them think for themselves, and in doing so, you might just gently guide them towards a new perspective.
I love that. It's so much more effective than just lecturing someone.
Right. It's about respect, it's about understanding. Bartlett even talks about the question behavior effect. The idea that asking those yes or no questions can encourage positive action.
Like, if you're trying to eat healthier, instead of saying, I'm going to eat more vegetables, you ask yourself, will I eat more vegetables this week?
Yes. Because by saying yes, even in your own head, you're more likely to follow through. And this isn't just for personal stuff. Leaders, marketers, they can use this too. Engage your audience. Ask the right questions. Make them feel empowered to choose the outcome you're aiming for.
It's subtle, but powerful. Okay, so we've got knowledge, skills, communication. But there's another piece of the puzzle that Bartlett talks about, and that's the power of story.
Oh, absolutely. And not just any story, but the stories we tell ourselves, our own personal narratives.
Because those stories, they really shape how we see the world, don't they?
They really do. They can either lift us up or hold us back. He tells this incredible story about the boxer Chris Eubank Jr., and this time he almost quit during a sparring session in Cuba.
Oh, I think I read about this. He was up against a much larger opponent getting beaten pretty badly.
Yeah, and he was ready to throw in the towel.
I can't even imagine to be in that position, physically and emotionally drained, doubting yourself.
But here's the thing. Eubank Jr. had this deeply ingrained self-story, this narrative of resilience, of never backing down.
And that story, that's what kept him going.
It absolutely did. That internal narrative fueled his determination. And that's what Bartlett wants us to see, how our self-stories, they shape our resilience, our ability to push through those tough times.
So it's not about just accepting the stories we've been telling ourselves, but about consciously choosing a more empowering narrative.
Exactly. We have the power to change the story, to create a vision for ourselves and go after it.
So we've talked about personal growth, communication, the stories we tell ourselves, but how do we take all of that and like package it for the world? How do you stand out?
Well, Bartlett's got some pretty insightful and sometimes hilarious advice on marketing and building a memorable brand. He tells this story about his first marketing agency. They had this giant blue slide installed right in the middle of their office.
A slide, like a playground slide, inside their office.
Yep, a big old slide. Totally impractical, but it became a symbol, right, of their company culture. Playful, creative, a little bit out there. He calls it useless absurdity.
Useless absurdity. I love it. So it wasn't about the slide actually being useful. It was about the feeling it created.
Exactly. It made a statement. And that ties into this idea that the best marketing isn't always about being the loudest or the shiniest. It's about being different, telling a story that people remember.
It's like Tesla. They barely spend anything on traditional advertising.
Right. But those cars, everyone knows a Tesla when they see one.
Exactly. They've built one of the most valuable car companies in the world without huge marketing campaigns.
Because their brand is built on that inherent absurdity,
Mhm.
electric cars that are practically spaceships. A CEO who launches rockets.
Yeah.
It's a story, and people are drawn to it.
It's like they don't have to buy attention, that they've figured out how to earn it.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It's not just about being loud, it's about being interesting. Sometimes less is more, you know.
Mhm.
If you can find that thing that makes you stand out.
So we've covered a lot here, but there's one more piece I want to get into. Bartlett talks about value perception, how we decide what's important, what's worth paying attention to.
Yeah, and this is where it gets really interesting. He's got this Law 14. Friction can create value.
Wait, friction? As in making things harder for people. I would think you'd want to make things easier for customers.
You'd think so, right? But he uses the example of General Mills cake mix back in the 50s.
Oh, yeah, I remember this. They were having trouble selling the cake mix because it was too easy. Just add water, bake, and boom cake.
Exactly. People didn't feel like they were really baking. So what did General Mills do?
They made it harder.
They took the egg out of the mix.
So instead of just adding water, you had to add an egg, too.
Yep. One extra step, but it made all the difference.
Because it felt like real baking.
Exactly. It tapped into this psychological thing about effort. People value things more when they put effort into them.
It's like you're not just buying a cake, you're creating something.
Yes. And you see this everywhere. Those travel websites that show you all the different airlines they're checking, even if they already have the best price lined up.
Creating that illusion of effort, right?
Exactly. It's about managing expectations, making people feel like they're getting something special. Sometimes a little friction in the right place can completely change how people perceive value.
It's not always about making things easier. It's about making them feel more valuable.
Exactly. And speaking of perception, Bartlett also talks about the importance of framing. Law 15. The frame matters more than the picture. He uses that great example of Joshua Bell, the violinist, busking in a subway station.
With a Stradivarius violin worth millions.
Millions. And most people just walked right by.
Because the frame was wrong. It was a subway station, not a concert hall.
Exactly. Same incredible music. But the context completely changed how people perceived it. And that's something we can all use, whether we're pitching an idea, selling a product, even just telling a story.
It's about setting the stage.
Exactly. Understanding your audience, creating that context that makes your message resonate. And Bartlett talks about the Goldilocks effect, too.
Goldilocks effect. What's that?
It's this idea that people are naturally drawn to the middle option, the one that feels just right. And it's not just about price. Think about how many products come in 3 tiers: basic, standard, premium. Most people go for that middle ground.
Even if it's not the best value objectively.
Often, yeah. It's just human nature. Understanding those little psychological quirks, it can make a huge difference. Bartlett also dives into behavioral economics. He's got this funny story about his niece refusing to give back a Christmas present, even though she didn't even like it.
Kids.
I know. But it illustrates this thing called the endowment effect. We overvalue things we own, even if they're not objectively valuable. He talks about this study they did with Duke basketball tickets.
Oh, yeah, I think I read about this one.
The people who actually had tickets valued them like 14 times higher than people who didn't,
That's because they owned them.
just because they were theirs. And that's something marketers use all the time. Free trials, money-back guarantees, anything that creates that feeling of temporary ownership.
Because it makes you more likely to buy it.
Exactly. Those little psychological nudges can make all the difference. And then on top of all of this, Bartlett talks about habits, building those systems that lead to lasting success.
He's a big fan of that Japanese philosophy, Kaizen, right?
He is. Small, continuous improvements. He tells this story about a General Motors plant that was really struggling.
What happened?
Toyota came in, implemented these Kaizen principles, and the plant completely turned around.
Just from small changes.
Small, but consistent. It's about those 1-degree shifts, he calls them, like changing a single word in your vocabulary. He talks about how he used to get frustrated when he was interrupted while working.
Relatable.
Right. So instead of snapping at people, he started saying, "Love, I'm just going to finish this quickly, and then I'm all yours."
Such a small change, but it completely changed the energy of those interactions. And of course, Bartlett talks about failure.
Which, let's face it, is something everyone experiences.
Absolutely. He talks about Booking.com. They have this culture of experimentation. They run thousands of experiments at the same time, knowing that most of them will fail.
So they've built a company where failure isn't something to be afraid of. It's just part of the process.
It's about learning from those failures, iterating, getting better. And then on the flip side, he talks about the ostrich effect.
Sticking your head in the sand.
Exactly. He uses that harrowing story of the Andes plane crash survivors. Some of them had to make unimaginable choices to survive.
It's a reminder that sometimes you have to face those difficult situations head on, even when it's terrifying.
Absolutely. Denial just makes it worse in the long run. And to wrap things up, Bartlett talks about building a strong team.
He uses that interesting analogy, creating a cult mentality, right? He does, but he's very clear he's not talking about anything harmful or manipulative. He's talking about that shared mission, those core values, that sense of belonging that brings a team together.
It's about finding people who are aligned with your vision.
Exactly. And it's not about the biggest paychecks or the fanciest perks. It's about creating a culture of excellence where everyone feels valued, everyone's working towards the same goal.
That's how you build something truly special.
Absolutely. It's about more than just a job. It's about building something meaningful together.
Wow, we covered so much ground today. From personal growth to communication to building a brand to putting together a killer team.
And what ties it all together is this understanding of human psychology, how we make decisions, what motivates us, what makes us tick.
Bartlett really challenges us to think differently, to be more intentional with our time, with our choices, with our lives. He asks this question: if you knew you only had 100 chips left on the roulette table of life, how would you spend them?
It's a powerful question, and it's something I think we should all ask ourselves. What truly matters to us? What kind of legacy do we want to leave behind?
These are big questions. But the Diary of a CEO gives us the tools, the insights, the inspiration to start finding our own answers.
It's a book that makes you think, makes you question, and ultimately, I think, makes you want to step up and become the best version of yourself.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time.